All right, team, good afternoon and welcome to all our attendees. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Ask the Educator, across company perspective. So I'm going to let Jamie T kick it off and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks so much, Marianne. I'm really excited about this event. As far as I know, it's the first of our kind in our industry, bringing together educators from so-called competitive companies to ensure that the education that's reaching our customers is as good as it possibly can be and as fact-based as it possibly can be. This originated from a question that I saw on LinkedIn, where someone was essentially asking if the results of a damaged chemical integrator could be read in the same way had it not been damaged. And there were dozens of answers with all different answers on this post. And while I think we all would agree that the existence of social media forums when it comes to community education is essential and extremely valuable, there's also times that the waters can get a bit murky when it comes to the information there, because so many people are coming at it from all different perspectives. And I think you'll find our very first question that was submitted that we're going to answer for today is related just to that. But to get us started, I just want to run through the line the way I see them all on my screen and ask everyone to introduce themselves. Myself, I am Jamie Turin. I work for a Proper Manufacturing Company. We have a CE continuing education portal called Proper Academy. Just like I think you'll see from all of our friends here, these courses are readily available. Some of them are on demand, some of them are live, and we're excited to meet you if I have not crossed paths with you so far. Marianne?
Sure, thank you, Jamie. I would like to go over a few housekeeping items first and logistics while I have you on. We're using the GoToWebinar platform today, and you do have a lot of control as an attendee. So if you look in your GoToWebinar viewer, you can click on the people icon. It might say everyone for you, but if you click on that icon, you can change your view to just who's talking. That's what I would recommend. That you can see both who's currently talking at the time and also the screen that I have up with a very brief slide or two on there. So that is one thing to be aware of. And then also you have your control panel, which usually appears on the right-hand side of your screen. Within there, you'll see a questions tab and also a chat tab. So I will be monitoring the questions tab. So if attendees at any time you have something that you want to ask us, go ahead and enter that in the questions tab, and we'll go through those as time allows. If not, we do get all of those in an email afterwards that we can answer your questions directly to you with the email that you registered with initially. So that's one option. There is also a chat function, and if you do put something in the chat, I'll look for that too. So I think that's it as far as housekeeping logistic items go, but please, we want this to be interactive. We want to bounce things off of each other, so use those functions that are available to you. And with that, thank you for having me today here. My name is Marianne Drosnock, and I'm the Director of Clinical Affairs at Healthmark Industries. And part of one of our main responsibilities really is education. So this is part of our commitment today to education and really knocking down those boundaries and seeing that we all work well together. And really what we are all here for as educators is to get the best practices out to you and really help eliminate any of those issues or bad information and really tell you where to go to get the right answer. So with that, Jamie Z, why don't you go next?
Thanks, Marianne. My name is Jamie Zarambinski, and I work at Key Surgical. I am the clinical educator for the sterile processing department in the sterile processing world. So we get the opportunity to work with a lot of different industry professionals, and thank you for that nice introduction, Jamie, to kind of what we're doing today. I think it's really important to show that we are all here, like you said, Marianne, as a common purpose to make sure that the folks that we work with get the right education and the right information. And it's something that we do here at Key Surgical too is have online education and opportunities for people to get that. And so being a part of a webinar like this today is just going to be super fun. Michelle?
I think last but not least, right? I'll just say it for myself. I'm just kidding. My name is Michelle Lemons. I'm the OR clinical educator. I work at Key Surgical with Jamie Z. I'm just so happy to be here today. You know, things go a mile a minute in all of our worlds, in the operating world and sterile processing. So sometimes you just need the quickest information that you can get your hands on to make the best decision you can make. So some of this today is just really evaluating how do we answer these questions quickly and efficiently but safely. So I'm excited to be here with all of you today.
Well, thank you so much for introducing yourselves. I want to give us a quick opportunity to actually answer that question that set off this entire event. So just to take us back to that, the first question is, when a indicator comes out of a sterilizer and is obviously damaged, so perhaps an integrator that has exploded or a chemical indicator where the ink is just completely smudged, can you trust the seemingly clear result? So if the integrator has exploded, but the ink appears to have gone to the pass section, can you trust this result? And I will get us started to say that a damaged integrator is a damaged integrator, so no. And then I will open the floor for anyone else who wants to contribute to that.
There's a really funny
Sorry.
movie. Sorry, Marianne. I'll be quiet right after mine is just a different comment to the same. But the guy in the movie, it's a children's movie on Disney, his gauge for his gas is broken. And so they're always like, well, how do you ever know when you need to get gas? And it's just kind of a funny, I thought, analogy for this same thing. You might be just fine really until you're not. With a damaged instrument, damaged anything, you can't make the right choices. Go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah, I just wanted Jamie to explain a little bit more about where this question came from. I know you touched on it briefly, but really the misinformation that's out there and what you saw that you came to me initially asking for this program. So I think it's important that attendees realize just because something's posted online or in a Facebook group that it's not necessarily the truth. So Jamie, can you give a little bit more on that background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I saw this question, I believe it was on LinkedIn, just asked by a technician who was looking for genuine support. And again, we don't want to in any way minimize the value of community education. Just like Michelle said, things move fast. Sometimes you need an answer right away. The distressing piece was that many people were defaulting to, well, it looks like a pass, so it must be a pass. And that secondary level of thinking about the situation was simply not there. And so I really want to encourage, part of this is encouraging everyone who's attending here today to remember that while we may often simplify things to say, according to ST79, blah, blah, blah is true, our day-to-day has a lot of nuance to our actions and to our activities. And so the information that we're going to share with you is going to take into account the reality that there are recommendations and guidelines, but also that hospitals have some autonomy to create policies. And in your day-to-day activities, there will be times that you have to make decisions, to make difficult calls that can't really be based in that one line in a reference guide. So hopefully that brings a little bit more context to this. If anyone else wants to share anything about this particular question, I'll open the floor. And if not, we can move on to our next question. I think this is a great transition. And I'm going to ask Marianne, who has extensive experience in standard writing and evaluating, to answer this question. And before we move forward, I want to say that many questions were sent in. Thank you so much for contributing those. Some of them we simplified from very specific to more general. And this is a great example of one of them. So we've simplified this question to say, what is the relationship between formal standards, for example, AAMI, AORN, and hospital policies? I know that in our general conversations, we have these conversations all the time. And these questions come up in forums all the time, Facebook groups all the time. My hospital that I just started at is doing X, and my old hospital did Y. The standard says something in between. So how do I know what decision to make? Marianne?
Yeah, Jamie, thank you. That's a great question. Before we get started, we had one comment that came in through the question tab from Elizabeth related to the indicators, who said, when in doubt, throw it out, right? I thought that was good. Yeah,
That's a good one.
But don't document it as past. So throw it out.
That's right. No. Very good. All right. So I think that that's a wonderful question of the relationship between standards, guidelines, and policies, and one that I get asked a lot. So for those who don't know, I'm very involved in the AAMI Standards organization, and I've co-chaired the AAMI Working Group 84, which is the endoscope reprocessing group that writes ST91 for many years, going on like 9 or 10 years now that I've been doing that. So I am really knowledgeable, I guess, or comfortable with the process of the AAMI standards, but I don't know that that always trickles down to the actual user level, technician level in a facility to know where does this stand versus what I'm supposed to do. So I was really glad this question came in. So your standards such as AAMI, which is the Association for the Advancement in Medical Instrumentation, sets the national standards for many different types of activities related to medical devices, or even manufacturers or users in the, which we call users. And I know, I'm sorry, that's unfortunate, but that really means the technician, the healthcare level, the hospital level, not a manufacturer or a regulatory level. So it does set those different standards depending on where you're at in the facility. And know that AAMI standards are still considered voluntary, but they can become mandatory by adoption by your facility, for example. So your hospital may say that you comply with AAMI standards, whether it be ST91 for scopes or ST79 for sterilization, steam sterilization in particular. So if you say you comply with it, then you become held to that standard when it comes to being surveyed and inspected. So that's how it becomes mandatory. So if you're saying you comply with it, then you need to take that information and figure out how that gets put into your policy. So you still need to write your policy, but it should reflect what your standard is or other guideline that you're complying with. So if it's SGNA for scopes or it's AORN, then that should be noted in your policy as a reference there. And what's really, I think, important for facilities to know is if you say you comply with, again, example, AAMI standards, then if you're doing something different in your policy, then you really do need to identify why that is, or what your reference is. So if you are instead following SGNA, for example, related to your hang time or your length of storage for scopes, but you say you comply with AAMI, you really should have that justified then. So it's about taking this big, broad topic like an AAMI standard or an AORN guideline and implementing it in your facility, and you do that through your policy and through education and competency on that. So I hope that helps. But the one final point I want to make as far as the standards go is know that words mean something in your standards. They mean a lot, actually. And I include this in a lot of the presentations that I go, but familiarize yourself at the beginning of each AAMI standard. It tells you what the different words mean, and those are action words. And as an example, a must, as written in a standard, is a regulation. So that is set by a governmental authority like OSHA to protect the safety of workers and patients. So you'll see things related to PPE that are a must, or related to transport of contaminated medical devices, that's a must, or even education on bloodborne pathogens, that's called a must in the standard. Whereas then if you see a shall in an AAMI standard or an ANSI standard or an ISO standard, a shall means a requirement of the document. So if you say you comply with that standard, you have to do it per the standard. So shall is a requirement versus a should, which is a recommendation, a strong recommendation, but it may be one way to do that or there may be another. So those are the three that I really want to stress and to make sure people are aware of, because I get that question a lot too.
So
So
Marianne, I was going to just layer on top of that. So let's say I'm a technician who recently joined a new hospital, and I'm being told to do something that is quite different than my previous institution. I'm under the impression that both institutions are meant to be following AAMI. What steps can I take to understand why there is a discrepancy? And I think the question that we see a lot, or the anxiety that comes through from the questions that are being asked, is how do I know if this is a should change or a must change?
Right. That's a great question, Jamie. And it takes a little critical thinking on the part of the technician to try to interpret that. So I know there is fear often when you get into a new facility or different, and it's the practices there are different than what you did before. So sometimes that's okay, right? There are different ways to do things that still comply with the standards and the guidelines, and those would have been written into your policy. But sometimes it's a lack of understanding of the standard or the guideline and not, or maybe not interpreting that correctly. So when those instances come up, I would recommend not only that you reach out to your management or your supervisor level, see if you have the different standards or guidelines available in your facility, and take a look at those and see maybe what you're doing is already covered in that standard. Maybe you're just doing a different way than you thought before. And then you can always reach out to your educators. Those of us on the call, for example, will gladly walk you through what the standards or guidelines say. But know that you have resources available, and it's not wrong for you to question things. We like you to be empowered to be able to make sure that you are doing the best, not only in your role, but the best for patient safety. So if something doesn't feel right, use the resources that you have available to try to figure out, is it right, is it not? And then take that action to work with management to try to figure out what's going on and how you can fix that.
And I think the big thing, I just want to fill in a little bit on this too, is Jamie, you mentioned going from one facility to the other. I think a lot of times in sterile processing, we take these expectations of what we have at a different facility and think we have to apply it to the new one that we're going to. But I think one of the big things we have to remember when you're going from facility to facility is opening a new mind, right? So you're going into a facility that is very different, unless it's within the same health system. But even within the same health system, all those practices might be different. Those facility policies will give you the answers that you need. There is a baseline expectation, obviously, with the standards for SC 79, but like Marianne said, those are all voluntary. So the modifications and changes that happen per facility are going to be per facility. So questioning obviously is very important, but sometimes we take things from what we used to do at our old facility and be like, well, we used to do it this way there. That may not apply to every single facility that you move around to. And we know that folks move around in sterile processing. So I think sometimes that's where you get those answers that are misinformation, or maybe we have to be a little bit more cautious of the things that are told online because we've done it that way for so long. But someone do some research or update their facility policy based on a new recommendation by a manufacturer, or update from a standard too. So it also, you have to include those surveying and auditing bodies who come in and they do have things. And so the modifications and changes that you have to do at your facility may be different than what they do at another facility too. So there are a lot of layers to it. But I think that Marianne nailed it. Being curious is great. It's a really good opportunity to learn more about our industry. But a lot of times those facility policies will give you exactly what the expectation is at your current facility.
Yeah, and one thing that I want to echo that Marianne said is that a lot of this is about personal empowerment and professional empowerment to ask the questions internally. I know this isn't always true, but I think we want to cultivate an environment where asking questions is not critical. It's not a criticism to the facility that you're joining. It's trying to get honest answers due to the essential aspect of our jobs, which is patient safety. And one thing that I've seen, if there are any educators or people who hope to be educators inside departments one day, is that sometimes there's a bit of an education gap when welcoming new employees to a department. So there's tons of attention, in the past 5 years since I've been at Proper on getting certified. And we have two really excellent organizations that provide that quality certification. But when we go into new facilities, something I constantly hear is that I'm not trained on new products. I'm not trained to use the brand of integrator that we're using here. And perhaps even those initial hospital standards and guidelines are not actually given. So you're, of course, at your bench thinking, well, I put an integrator in every corner. And then your colleague comes in and says, no, 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 here we only put an integrator in the center of every tray, right? And I know that would be frustrating to me. I have 10 years of experience somewhere else. I know what I'm doing. I went through certification, and all of a sudden I'm being told I'm wrong. And so I would encourage anyone who's on this call, who's ever been in that situation, who might be looking to go to a new facility, or even who maybe has responsibility when it comes to education, to remember also those biases and background knowledge that come from people making a transition to a new location. They who have not made a career change and found that something was done very differently at a new job in a new company, even if it's a very similar title, can raise their hand. But there will be no hands in the air because it's always just a bit different.
One
Yeah.
thing I like to say in nursing, no, I'm not in sterile processing, but I think it translates perfectly, is the only scary nurses, I tell this to every nurse I've ever trained in my life, the only scary nurse is a nurse that doesn't ask any questions. Because when you work in an environment that's constantly changing and the education, it sounds cliche because we say it all the time, but you need continuing education for the rest of your life when you work in healthcare. And it's just no different. So some of those, we get involved a little bit too much sometimes with the relationship aspect. And I realize there's so many things that people say to me that I don't like how they said it to me. And it's really hard for me to accept that information because we're humans. But at the same time, we are constantly learning. Ask the question, even if they give you kind of a brush off response. Yeah, Marianne.
Yeah. So I think a lot of what we're all hitting on is that dissemination of information then, and making sure we're queuing people in that are new within the department. So Michelle, what do you think are the best practices when it comes to distributing information in the department, including things like shift huddles or daily meetings, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, for when I was kind of reading through these questions, I was like, man, communication, right? Oh, everybody's like eye roll because we all have that. It's so hard. And actually, in 2017, the Joint Commission put out data that communication is the #1 cause of sentinel events for patients in healthcare. So it's not a small problem. It's not something that we're going to change tomorrow. Or, we even have those funny, sarcastic things that we say when we get kind of fatigued by meetings or communication, and you say, well, this could have been an email, and we're having this interaction again. But it's funny, but it's also it can be a lot. And then especially as we're talking about onboarding new people, the saying is always drinking from a fire hose. You're getting so much information. Even if you told me it's gone, I cannot remember because I'm trying to remember my locker combination for like 15 minutes. It's really challenging, especially when you're new. That's very hard. But I think the things that when it comes to communication, and you can see the list of questions there on Marianne's screen. So what are the best practices was how this question was summarized. What are the best practices for the distribution of information in a department? And so some of the things that we can go to, of course, are the guidelines. I actually think sometimes these are great questions for social platforms. How do you guys structure your meetings? How do you structure your huddles? How would you disseminate this piece of information? But in addition to having that social support, we do have those guidelines and support in the background. So a couple things, I think the best things when you're thinking about disseminating information in a department is, first, what are you communicating? Is this a first time training, or is this a retraining? Is it new information? Is it something very appropriate for a 15-minute huddle that says, hey, the washer's broken. I got so-and-so coming out at this time. And then in addition to that is when you give them that information. I mean, there's a lot of bad examples, but there's also really good ones, right? If we're missing an instrument and I'm in the operating room, the time to tell me that is not when my patient's already there and sedated. You know, if at all possible, let's talk about that last night, you know, way before, while this patient is still at home, ideally, or before their procedure. So what we're communicating and when are two vital considerations. And then how it's communicated, I think, is how we get this dissemination of information. I don't know anybody else, but if you put a poster up somewhere, I'm not going to see it. I will walk by it. I might notice a picture, and then I'm gonna move on sometimes. But if you repeatedly communicate that to me verbally, email me, put a poster up, and then we talk about it again in person. So I think some of the best ways of communicating information are just multiple ways, as many as possible, and then repeat it. And also tell people why. Why do I care about this? That's in so many words, that's our number one question for everything that we encounter in our lives. Why do I care? What do I need to do with this? And how does it impact what I'm doing? And then I'm a very big proponent, in case you couldn't tell already, of repeat education. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Tell me again. Do my training on the first, the first week or whatever we have to do. But then give me a follow-up. Give me a mentor that's going to check with me in a month to tell me all these things again, just for that example of a new person. AORN guidelines, I really like the way they put it. That's the Association of Perioperative Registered Nurses. They go through a lot of these things in different ways how, but they also really stress having a patient safety culture in your department, which I think can solve a lot of communication problems if people feel empowered, as Marianne, Jamie, everybody already said this, but if they feel empowered to come forward and communicate something, because the end result for all of us always is that patient on the operating room table, our patient in the operating room. If it's a question about integrators, if it's a question about a missing instrument or how to put an instrument together, or it doesn't matter. The end result is always patient on the operating room table for all of us, or in a procedure room, right? Or anywhere that instruments are used, which is a lot. So anyway, the last three things, and then I'll pass it to you, Jamie. I see your hand, but they just structure the pillars of that patient safety culture are trust, reporting things, and improving based on those reports, which I like. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for anyone who is struggling, and a great place to start. One thing that I hear a lot is that third shift or overnight shift, they're the ones who seem to miss out on all the information.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that part of this comes from the fact that, of course, management changes throughout the day. The people are changing throughout the day. Perhaps the third shift or overnight shifts are less busy or fewer employees. And so I think in some ways, unfortunately, they got a little bit forgotten. I know that that's something that you even did like research on your social media about how do people get their information before this, which was awesome. But what advice do you have for the manager or for that employee who doesn't get that information? So the manager who's responsible for thinking about distribution to all of their employees, or the employee who's realizing, wait a second, I just showed up on shift. There's a new product here that I've never seen before, and no one told me about it.
Well, my husband is a nurse as well. He worked 12-hour night shifts for 10 years. So I heard about this a lot at my house, but also just in general, it's hard. It can be very challenging if nobody takes responsibility for that. So for the managers, you need a plan. You need a plan for people. You can't just say, yeah, they can figure it out. They're not going to just figure it out. That's not safe. It's not the best practice. So I always like to start with, getting feedback from those people. And for those people, I would say advocate. I cannot safely use this to care for my patients safely if you don't train me on it. And that there's nothing, I think that there's a few things that come to my mind with just traumatic experiences where if you're not equipped, you might be equipped mentally, emotionally, physically, all the ways. But if you're not equipped with the equipment that you need to safely care for a patient, it wrecks you. Like emotionally, you're like, I have everything except for I can't do anything. My hands are tied. That's awful. No one wants to feel that way. It's very traumatic. I will not tell you my personal stories, but don't do that. Don't do that to your people. Teach them, educate them, train them, advocate for them to get. If you have a rep come in, Jamie said this before, and I just could have hugged her, right? She's like, oh, I used to come in early when I would do, product in service really early and then stay for the evening and then stay so that I could catch all of the people. So I think that's a perfectly reasonable request. If you have someone coming in to do a training, keep them. Keep them. You are the customer. Keep them to train everyone, advocating for yourself. I will get off my soapbox right now.
I think,
Thanks
and
so
I
much,
could be on
Jamie.
that soapbox.
Z, and then Marianne.
So the one thing I do want to say too, and something that I think we've all learned throughout the pandemic, right? We've learned a lot of different things throughout the pandemic, is the versatility of information and ability to deliver that information in a lot more unique ways. So we have new platforms like Teams, and we have things that we can do a lot more video interactions. And I think that utilizing those kind of resources, we are moving into a more advanced healthcare facilities and kind of system in general, using those kind of things to communicate and to be more on like a quote unquote team can really help with those different shifts. But like you said, Michelle, we all know that third shift feels like a third shift a lot of times too. And definitely something I used to do. I would always, as a rep, I would go into a facility and say, hey, if you have a third shift, I'll come in at 12:01 and we'll do it. And it's a lot better going in with that expectation right when you start a shift than someone coming at your end of your shift at 6:30 a.m. to do an in-service, worked 8 hours or 10 hours or however many hours, and now you have to sit and you might be late for the bus, or you might be late to your other job, or you might be late getting home to get your kids to school, or whatever it may be. So utilize those resources that you have, absolutely, when it comes to product training. Use the reps for what they're supposed to be, right? And the expectation should be to come in at midnight, and should be to train reps or train your technicians on all those different shifts.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable expectation of reps to do the proper training on the different shifts. I just wanted to comment, we had Robin sent in a statement over the questions tab. It says they use daily huddle notes to reach all shifts. So they have their meetings, they write out the notes from that, and then that's accessible to the next shift so they can see where things are at. I thought that was a good idea to share.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And that's like a place that's consistent, right? It's a plan. It's that plan with consistency that's well communicated repeatedly, right? Now I know every time I come in on third shift, it's going to be in the same place, and I can set my expectation. And then the expectation can be set of me. So I think that's really great.
Yeah, and what I love about that is it acknowledges that we are all human. I know that I set out every morning and I'll say, oh, I definitely have to get so-and-so done, or call this other person, or what have you. And if it doesn't go in my, to-do list or on some sticky note on my wall, it's a 50-50 shot, right? We're only human. We're all so busy. I love that idea because it recognizes that you may not remember, even if you have 3 perfectly designed huddles, right? Everyone knows when they get there, they come to the huddle. The truth is, if you don't have a reference for it, you may not remember to tell the last shift the same thing as the first shift. And frankly, it might go in reverse. You may learn something throughout the day, and then by the time the next shift in the morning comes in, you've forgotten that had happened. So I love that idea. And I think also embracing the technology that we have, and utilizing that. I mean, these are amazing ways that we can all make our departments better. And to kind of continue that empowerment theme, I would say that if you're on here saying, man, I wish my department had this, present the idea. Bring it to the attention of someone. Tell them, hey, I heard about this. How can we make it happen? And just to continue to echo this sentiment, if you need help, if you're not sure how to present an idea or something that we talk about, all of us are more than happy to help you. Don't feel like you have to put it publicly. The questions section, only Marianne can see right now. So it's not like if your colleagues on this call, they're going to see you ragging on something. All of us are on LinkedIn and social media. You know, we can help you very strategically approach these maybe sometimes challenging situations that may be faced in a department. And
So,
I was just going to kind of ask one more little bit of question to Michelle, and then we'll kind of take it to the next question that's coming in. So Michelle, I think one place that their communication is particularly challenging is when that horrendous phone call comes from the OR saying something's not quite right. Or on the flip side, and this is a story I will share that I think you all got a laugh of. If anyone ever attended a Proper Academy event, maybe you heard this story before, but I started my career as a spinal implant sales rep. I worked for a very small company. It was not even an American company, so we weren't that familiar with the protocols, to be completely honest. And I remember being out in California and showing up with my trays, which had only been requested maybe however long it takes to fly trays from New York to California, amount of time early, and just saying, okay, Dr. So-and-so needs these sterilized for 9 a.m. And meanwhile, it was maybe 10 o'clock, whatever the last truck of FedEx could have been, right? And had truly, honestly, and deeply had no idea the travesty that was to these sterile processing departments. I really didn't understand at all. No one told me. Even the department that I was dropping them off at, and there were a couple that I did this to, so if you recognize me, sorry. But the worst thing that was happening to me was that I would be put on like a list on the wall, like for late drop-offs. And honestly, as the rep in that situation, it doesn't matter. Like, the surgeons aren't gonna tell me I can't bring the trays if they want to use it. And that's what matters to them, right? Like, they're making money off the surgeries. And so recognizing when, like, it's kind of twofold, that recognizing that the reps may legitimately not know in that situation that they're doing something frustrating or why it is so frustrating, but also figuring out how to communicate in situations where maybe a tray didn't arrive on time and now it's going to be late to the OR, or the tray didn't arrive on time and you have to have a hard conversation with a rep. And I think that's going to kind of transition us to our next question too, Michelle. So I talked for a long time, but basically what I'm asking is, how can we better communicate with the OR, especially when we're getting accused for things that are not our fault?
yeah, good question. That's probably the question that everybody has for their whole life, right? Like, how do I communicate with a challenging person, or when in a challenging environment? We all have that. I think again, I will fall back sort of on the same answer. Having a plan in place for what's going to happen. It's hard in those moments because I know Jamie and I have talked about this a lot, and I'm going to kind of shunt over this second part that ties in really well with this question to her, but it's just important to understand it's our patient on the operating room table. So my frustration in the OR calling you may not really be about you, and I'm sorry. You know, I'm sorry. It's so unfortunate. I know that you personally did not do this to me personally, but in that moment, the pressure is 1,000, and I have, there's a lot of other things going on. So first of all, I'm sorry, right? Second of all, no conversation should be the end of a communication, right? No, like, very frustrating interaction. Again, Jamie and I have like a whole webinar on this. That should be the start. That frustrating interaction should be the start of a solution together. Should be the start of a solution between the operating room and sterile processing. Why are we having this problem? Is it really all the time? Let's look at it. And then how, when we have this happen, what's our channel? What's our plan in advance? Unfortunately, in the moment, things get the better of us and the emotions heat. And if it's a sales rep, a lot of people aren't comfortable. They're not going to be like, hey, don't do this. Some people are, but other people have to go to their manager and have their manager say, tell them not to do this anymore. And their manager is not comfortable, but I'm a very strong proponent for direct communication. So that would be my take a breath, say what you need to say, tell them why, help them understand. And then from there, you can build a conversation together. But Jamie, next question on the list, Jamie Z. One of the other parts of this really challenging interaction go the other way. When I send you a tray from the operating room, can be a disaster, right? Sometimes I've just thrown everything in there and for reasons we won't go into today, right? But in your expertise and experience, what are some reasonable expectations that sterile processing professionals can have for the point of use process when trays are coming from the operating room or from those procedure rooms? What are some reasonable things they can always expect?
There are always reasonable expectations, and I'm going to circle back a little bit to facility policy, and this is something that should be addressed in a facility policy at minimum. There should be at least a treated instrument in some facet of however that may be. The standards have a couple recommendations for, if it's a moistened towel, if it's actually a treatment spray, even having it in like a little bag that keeps everything nice and humid so that blood doesn't dry onto it. There's a lot of different tools and a lot of different products that are out there to help with that. But at minimum, they should be treated. It shouldn't just be a bunch of instruments thrown into a tray, sent to the sterile processing and say, good luck. We get that. They should be organized. I know that facilities I've been into, they help with the organization by saying these are the instruments that we used versus these are the ones that we didn't use. That can help minimize time in sterile processing. If you throw everything dirty into that tray, it can be really challenging to see what was used and what wasn't used. You're opening hundreds of instruments to make sure that they are nice and clean, and then you see one that is really dirty and you're like, oh my God, if they would just kind of organize that a little bit nicer. And it helps also with distribution of surgical soil, right? So if you keep everything that's dirty together, you can help maintain that surgical soil into one little space. If you throw it in with a bunch of instruments that weren't used, now you've dirtied every single instrument in that whole tray too. So organization, any little bit that can help can be super great. The other part of organization comes with hand washing stuff, right? So cords, anything cord organization, so they're not all wound up in a kind of a rat's nest. That can be an issue and can slow things down as well. Anything that is tagged with like a quick turn, so something that needs to be quickly turned around, anything that's broken, anything that's sharpened, anything they found in the operating room, we don't get a lot of chances with that direct communication. So if their frustration is they're being operating room, that an instrument keeps getting sent up to the operating room or back to the operating room because it was broken or wasn't sharpened, there is a limit to the knowledge of what instrumentation is broken or needs to be sharpened in sterile processing. So any sort of information that they can shed light on for the sterile processing can help with that. And so it's kind of that opportunity to have direct communication. And it's the one opportunity that you do get direct communication. Operating rooms often have nurses bring case carts down, or they have a runner bringing stuff down. If you have a minute to say hi or to build that relationship with that person that's bringing instruments and you're in decontam, you're not just a person that the expectations back there is that you clean the instruments, right? Say thank you, or hey, how did it go? Or have a line of communication open with that person dropping it off. I know there are facilities that they just come down in an elevator and you have to open the elevator and you kind of get what you get. But if you get the opportunity to be at a facility, or if you are at a facility that you do get to interact with someone, it's a great spot and chance to kind of build that relationship with folks dropping off instrumentation.
I think we talk about that a lot too with like training together, making sure that if you train together, you have so much broader of an understanding of what that instrument actually is or needs, or whatever, whatever it is that you're talking about. So it's a really great point, not only to get to know each other.
Something to say too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit, referring back to the IFUs, of course, always for the instruments that are being pre-cleaned or point of use treatment, as we call it now, in the OR, and making sure we're identifying what those steps should be, in addition to what Jamie said about making sure that we maintain that moist environment through treatment for transport down to the processing area. The other thing I wanted to touch on is specific to endoscopes. And if we get time, I'm going to talk a little bit later about the new ST91 that's coming out, but know that we've retermed pre-cleaning in the new standard to be point of use treatment, which is what we're used to seeing in ST79 and our other surgical type devices. So that's one good thing. And related to this treatment, there's pre-treatment in the OR related to scopes. We need to have a way to identify, to note the time that pre-cleaning is performed, and then that needs to be conveyed to reprocessing staff. So it's one thing I always teach about. This is already in the Olympus IFUs. It's already in AORN. It'll be in the new ST91. How do we that are processing that scope know whether we're within a 1 hour hold time or not if we don't have an objective way to look and see what time that previous step was done? So, I always like to tie it back to endoscopes, but consult the IFU, right, for all devices. And then for scopes, make sure we note that time that you do that process of pre-treatment and somehow convey that to the technicians in processing, whether it be a tag, a label, in your electronic records, whatever it is. I should be able to look at that scope and know when that pre-treatment was done. So back to you, Jamie, or whoever else has a question on that.
Yeah, and I was gonna add to all this that once you get your tray downstairs, so something Jamie Z had said is about kind of cross-contaminating instruments. So that's another place where I see a lot of questions. A tray comes back fully wrapped, didn't even open it. The joy of the total knee replacement, right? 35 trays end up on your desk. You spend all that time. What is someone supposed to do if they get back a tray that never even was popped open? Can the rep just take it as it is? Is it still sterile? And similarly, Jamie Z's got that one. And similarly, once I receive my portion of the femur or whatever has landed in, we got a little screen issue, I think. Whatever has landed in my desk, other than take a photo so I can share it on Facebook, what should I do?
So, this is written in the standards too, but anything that when that patient enters that room, if it was in that room, it needs to go back down to decontamination. Also, if it enters decontamination, regardless if it went in that room or not, it is now in a dirty environment. So take that wrap off, put it through the whole process that you would any other instrumentation that comes into that department as well. So just maintain that expectation that if something was in the patient room with that patient open, that's got to go down to decontam. It's got to be reprocessed. We're not taking any chances. We're not taking any risks. If it wasn't open, and they brought it into decontam, anything that enters in that decontamination department doesn't get to skip any steps, right? It has to go through that whole process. And I just think that is an industry standard and expectation that we should maintain. We don't want people, skipping steps and I've been in a situation where a rep has come to me and said, hey, we didn't actually use that in the procedure, but I need it again for another procedure at another facility in an hour. Is there any way you can just push it through the window and then I'll just grab it and it'll be dirty and I'll bring it over to the other facility and they'll decontam it? We can't have that in our facilities, right? We have to maintain the expectation that we do the same thing with every instrument set that comes into our facility and the same expectation when it comes out of that facility, right? So maintain those lines, maintain those barriers, clean it the same way that you would as any other tray that comes down dirty from the operating room. And I'll stand by that one.
Can I add tiny? Right back to what you said before, this is the importance of having that whole communication between the OR and sterile processing. They might not know that in the operating room, that if they brought it in the room, even if it's wrapped and it's not used. So that's just an exciting opportunity, I think, to have a better understanding. Also, how much time it takes you now to do all those things. you know, to clean all the instruments that weren't even used. So
Yeah, well, that is a really big question and problem. How much money does it cost to clean a tray that never needed to be cleaned? That's one we're not going to solve today. And I can't believe how quick the time went. We're in the last couple of minutes of this presentation. Wanted to quickly thank everyone who has joined us here today, who stayed on, who's given comments and questions. I'm sure there's a whole deck of them that we will definitely answer over the next couple of weeks and hopefully in future events just like this. If you have any feedback, again, reach out to us. We're here to help and support you. One thing I want to kind of open-endedly ask, and this is something that I think came up a lot today, a theme that we had a lot today of empowerment and patient ownership. Who really owns the patient? And I would love to see a world where the sterile processing technicians, employees, and teams have a similar feeling about the patients on those cards. You know, that we learn that it is more than a case card. It's a person. It's someone. I've seen plenty of people talk about how they're having surgery at their facility and that's a really weird place to be. I know I've had surgery at hospitals that I've worked in, and it's just it's a weird position to be in. You know, you want it to be the best, but when you're in there and you're doing the hard work and you're not receiving the respect that you deserve from frustrating nurses or staff or doctors or reps, we tend to forget that it's not just a case card. It's a person who's on the receiving end of that surgery. So going down the line on my screen, Marianne, Michelle, and then Jamie, what closing thoughts do you have as it relates to empowerment, as it relates to patient ownership, and anything else we said today?
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I think that's a great question. And I think being that sterile processing is often so isolated or remote from where the surgical procedures are actually performed, it means they don't see that patient, or may not even know. You may not even know how that product is used in the surgical arena. So I think that incorporating that not only the communication that we've been talking about, but having some cross-functional education, learning about how those instruments are used. I like to teach on the endoscopy side. You know, these are the types of scopes. These are how they're used. This is what may be wrong with the patient. Try to find ways to integrate that personal feeling that we may not have because we are so far removed from that, but know that there is a patient on the other end of that device. And it could be you, it could be your family member, it could be your child. You know, it's really scary, but we have to have that empathy. And I think that creating awareness and the education is what helps to get us there.
that's a really great point, Marianne. I think, how do you even echo that, right? Just echo it, echo it again. Yeah, education. I think that we sometimes the communication working in healthcare is from leadership that just says, well, it's everybody's patient. And it kind of seems like this blanket, like, yeah, okay, yeah. But what does that really mean for me? So sometimes I think some of the most motivational things can just be, I think you put two people in the same room that do something different and they start to share their experiences, and they can really start to see that overlap if they have the same break room, or they train together, or they do that cross-functional, cross-department training. And all of a sudden I'm sharing stories about how in the operating room, this happened in a case and this happened in a surgery. And you're sharing with me what happened with an instrument and the lengths you had to go. So I think just getting people together is the hardest part. And then I think the sharing kind of happens naturally, and that's inspiring for each party, for everybody that's involved, to remember that we have the same mission and the same goal. We're all important, right?
Yeah, and I think that even in the last, I've been in the sterile processing industry almost 10 years now, which is crazy to think. But I think that in the last even 5 years, or even in the last couple years, you see this massive shift in the sterile processing world of it just being a job, right? I think there's a lot more folks that are taking ownership of what sterile processing is. And There's a lot more community colleges out there that are offering it as an actual skill set that you can get trained on, and you can go and take, observation hours, and you can get a job that can turn into a career. And I think that there is a long way to go with that too, especially for the sterile processing world. It has to do with a lot of layers of, expectations from the department. I think that, sterile processing folks know so much information, and often it gets underutilized, even from the operating room or materials management or even the C-suite, having the CEO, the CFO, COO coming down and really understanding what the sterile processing department does. It's one of those departments that isn't a revenue generator, like you said, Jamie. It's one of those things that the surgeon knows that they're making the money, but you can't do a surgery without the sterile processing department. And sometimes it takes a really catastrophic event. Sometimes it takes something terrible happening, and that's not how we should have sterile processing come into the world, by something terrible happening, having to kind of redact and change the ways, or they come into the news, or like the CNNs, they start seeing who sterile processing is, and then we have to change because of that. I think it needs to be a more proactive approach, and really putting that value into the folks that are working in this department. And that starts like with Michelle, what you said, getting OR teams working with sterile processing, eating lunch in the same area, or having an expectation of cross collaborating and communicating together. I know that the SC79, the 91, ARN, all these different organizations talk about the importance of collaboration and communication and multidisciplinary teams, where you're not just pitting each other against each other either. So there's a lot to it, a lot of layers, but I think that those are some of the wrap-up points that I definitely want to make when it comes to building a better, stronger healthcare system and building a better, stronger team, even with the operating room and sterile processing.
Right. I just wanted to share a few things that came online, and thank you to everyone for sending in your questions and your comments. We're getting a lot of comments here that we're drawing to a close. Things like great point, ladies. Tiffany asked, are there going to be more of these Ask the Educator webinars? Great conversations. 1 hour was not long enough. Awesome. I really enjoyed it. I like the idea of people getting together. So really good feedback, and thank you all for joining us today. I just wanted to share those because I think it helps to show that you can put these in. I'll never single you out particularly. I may use your first name, but that's about it. So thank you again, everybody, for joining. I'll let anybody else do any closing that they want to do, but I think it was really good, and I like this casual conversation that really lets us explain our viewpoints, and because we're different, right? All four of us on here have different areas of expertise and focus, and I think that we're always stronger together, and you can see right how we complement each other and our different perspectives. So thank you again to each of you as presenters, and especially to our attendees.
And I just want to say something that we said at the very beginning, and we're all here for the same purpose, right? You see competing companies working together. It's for the end users, right? It's for the folks that are actually utilizing the products and working with our companies. We're not here to do any sort of, they said, she said, that kind of stuff. And I think that has wrapped up everything in what we say today. So I just want to say it's been so fun working with a bunch of different organizations on this, and communicating with the end users and folks in the healthcare industry. It's just so invigorating to see powerful women too. I just want to say that for all wonderful women in this industry working together and just really being rock stars.
Thank you, everybody. What a cool experience to be a part of. Great questions to start the whole thing, Jamie T. So it was really great. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Awesome. And I'll just close out by saying again, we so appreciate you all joining us. I hope that we will have many of these events to come in the future. And also, just to reiterate, there is so much value in participating in the Facebook groups, in the social media organizations where your communities are interacting, where you're interacting with professionals from all over the world, truly. So again, we don't want to minimize the value there. We are here to empower and encourage you to give it that extra little bit of thought, or consult someone who maybe knows that little technical detail that you've long forgotten because you're such a rock star and you passed your tests before. And just to encourage you to join us on any CEs that we all offer, our teams offer. We'd love to have you, and we hope to see you again soon. And then on the screen, in case you were focusing on our beautiful faces, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that our emails are here. And so please feel free to reach out to any of us directly on email, social media, through our platforms. We're all here to support you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
day.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.